And welcome back, everybody, to the Podcaster Nation. That's right. I said welcome back because I know you were just listening to our stuff and you loved it so much that you wanted more. So you came back for more. Folks, that was a brilliant decision because we have a lot more. Now, why do we have more? Because this is the podcast that's about podcasters, it's for podcasters, and it's done by podcasters. And you cracked the code. Our guest today is a podcaster. You folks are brilliant. I absolutely love you. This is the place where we all come together to raise each other up, and this is the place where the rising tide raises all ships. So let's get sailing. Bring in our guest today. Please welcome to the show, certified life coach, weight loss coach, author, and podcaster, host of Rebellious Wellness Lifestyle. Please welcome Gregory Anne Cox to our show. Greg, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Rory. Thanks for asking.
No, I
I
appreciate
just
you.
have to say, I love your intro about raising all boats. Like, there's so much division in the world and derision, and I just love the idea that you set the context of that's why we're here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. That is the idea behind the podcast. It's for all the podcasters to come together and just raise each other up. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
We have a lot to cover, obviously. So why don't you tell
because
everybody
I'm
just
old.
why don't you go ahead and tell folks who is Gregory Ann Cox, what brings you here, and what are you about?
Well, actually, you brought me here because this is your podcast and you invited me. But what brings me to podcasting or who I am? I guess we could start. The name of my podcast has always had the word rebel. I've changed the name just recently, rebranded. And I think it's because I came into the world that way. Were my mother still here, she would say, absolutely, she was a rebellious child. Not a bad kid, not an impolite kid. I mean, I went to school, I learned my manners, but I always wanted to see what was like behind what they were teaching us. I wanted to know how things worked rather than just going along with the thing. I My first career was as a chef, although I wanted to be a doctor. And I had a chemistry teacher who said, you'll never be good at science. You should go into languages or psychology. So I did that. And then I really loved cooking. So cooking has an element of science, of course. And then coaching being the next thing was really sort of a throwback to the wanting to be a doctor. I just really wanted to help people. And after I got tired of being in kitchens, everybody was off on vacation or at the beach, I was cooking for people. I just decided to make a career change. And I was 50. So this rebellious idea of, I've just never followed the traditional path. And it's always worked out for me, luckily.
I didn't realize the rebellious part went that deep. I had a chance to listen to your podcast. It sounded like, on the surface anyway, you were rebelling against sort of the idea that when you get to a certain age, you have to accept certain ailments. But it sounds like it does definitely go deeper than that. Am I kind of close, though, on the surface?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That is what the podcast is really designed to get somebody's ear who's a little bit dissatisfied with what they're hearing in the universal conversation about aging. Ageism, yes, but more like I don't feel great. I don't want to take meds, or I'm on meds. I don't like them. I'm afraid of the future because I don't really know how to plan for 70, 80, 90 in a healthy way. And what they're telling me just doesn't make sense, right? Like I got to take drugs and I'm going to just decline. So that it is to get somebody's attention who's in that space of, is there anything else? And bring experts to the conversation. They could be doctors, they could be lay people. I do have other coaches on at times if they have a unique spin on what their work is. And the thing I love about podcasting, which you can probably relate to, Rory, you never know who's going to hear it. So we can target our audience all we want, but then we're going to hear from one person who's like, "Oh, my girlfriend told me she listened to this episode and I should," and it was great. It really helped me. That's what I love about podcasting.
Oh, I love that. And yeah, we're probably gonna have to come back to that later on in terms of what you love about it. But I love that you're already on that point. And like I said, I listened to the podcast, and I know that you. It sounded like you bring on some like alternative folks, maybe more holistic remedies and stuff. Is that
Absolutely.
okay? And is that something that you sort of do you lean that way more than the traditional medicine, or is it 50-50?
I like to say that it still takes a village. We may be grown up, but I really think that the best way I shouldn't say the best way. One of the ways that I see makes a difference for people's lives is to have a number of different professionals and they could be alternative to balance out the Western. Western medicine is great at a lot of things, but it's not great at prevention, and it's really not a healthcare model. It's a sick care model. And it's a
Mm,
model that looks at one part of the body as a separate from the other part. Like we have a cardiologist to look at the heart. We may have a, bone doctor to look at our, but what's going on in that holistic person that is, that body that is a person with cells and organ, they're all talking to one another inside. So why are doctors trying to separate them out? So I do like alternative therapies. One of my absolute bottom lines is I don't bring anything to the conversation that isn't ha does not have sound science behind it. So 10 years ago, everybody looking askance at acupuncture, perhaps, and thought, sound therapy was weird. Well, now major medical centers, hospitals, cancer, they use these professionals in the treatment for people because if you can't get pain relief from meds, sometimes acupuncture can do that. If you can't get pain relief or relief from depression symptoms, sometimes music therapy is an adjunct, not a replacement for, but something to add on. So that's what I like to think about. It's alternative and Western as a blend for whatever works best for the person.
nice. So it's kind of like everything has its place depending on what the
Yeah.
person needs.
Yeah. If I have a broken arm, I'm going to a doctor who's studied Western medicine and fixing broken bones, right?
Right.
And not everybody would, and there's nothing wrong with that. They might find some alternative. But for me, I'm pretty much a middle of the road kind of girl.
No, I don't blame you. I understand that. I've never liked doctors myself in terms of just in general. I never wanted to go, never
Yeah.
trusted anything they told me. And then I had pneumonia and stopped breathing and,
Oh,
almost died. And yeah, then I was okay with the doctor on that day.
absolutely. Good
Yeah.
decision there,
So
Rory.
3 months in the hospital and I was like, okay, yeah, the
Holy
doctor,
cow.
it worked out.
Oh my
But
gosh. Well,
yeah, so I mean, you're right. There is a time and a place where we kind of have to go, hey, prevention's great, but I'm broken. So
yeah.
something needs to be
Fix
fixed.
me.
Right, exactly. But you're right. That's a sick care model. I mean, until I got to that point, I didn't want to hear what any of them had to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So, in terms of being a certified life coach, weight loss coach, these are things then that you practice through the podcast, or do you do those separately? And the podcast is educational. How do those things all work together
Yeah,
for
the podcast is really just there for education and entertainment sometimes, depending on who the guest is. But I haven't I do when I switched the brand, which was now probably back in February. You may have had this experience where you move your website to a new host and you get all new bells and whistles and it looks great, but some of the things don't follow, like the offerings that I had. So I'm still getting them back up. Um, and one of them is a coaching pro. So I have a thing called the Power of Five, and that's all you ever need to stay healthy and age well. Tenants, as it might sound. And I have a course that's based on that, but right now all I have is the actual 5-day email program because the course is still being moved over. So I do coaching in that way. I haven't had a one-on-one client in some time. I'm not averse to them. I just don't market that. I kind of think if somebody wants to talk to me about it, they will.
I see. So you cut out for just a second. I want to make sure that I get the name of the program clear.
Yeah.
So it's the power
The
it,
Power of
of
Five.
five. Okay, that's the
Yeah.
part I missed.
Yeah.
Power of five. And that was group coaching as opposed.
No, no, the program is actually, so the Power of Five right now is a 5-day free email course. And then the thing that I have that isn't up on my website yet is a one-on-one
Ah,
program where the person gets a session with me and then 30 days worth of implementing each of these five things. Yeah, so it's a quick down and dirty. I find that these days people's attention spans are shorter. And in the old days, you'd sign up for a 6-month, 9-month coaching program. I don't, there may be people that still do that. I've done plenty of them. But I find for me working with somebody, especially at a certain age, you're like, all right, let's just get to the point.
right, exactly.
1-month model.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Like I said, I'm glad that I asked you about that just because I wanted to clarify it, make sure everybody could hear it. So
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, yeah.
which is excellent. The guests that you bring on, then the guests are for educational purposes also, and how do you decide who comes on your show?
So I, there's a little bit of energetic resonance when somebody pitches me. And of course, when somebody does pitch me, which I get agencies pitching me with guests and, platforms like Podmatch, um, then I go look at what they look like online, what they sound like, what is their energy there. And I want a diverse representation of what I think makes up healthy aging. And it could be mindset, it could be physical stuff. And some people sell things, a lot of them have programs. I don't, as a rule, I don't have people that just want to sell something. So if their whole website is a sales page, that's great. But what if somebody wants more information? If they don't have, or an email course, something, then I tend not to have those people. But they also have to have that idea. I don't want, I've gotten pitched by a lot of what I think is a little bit outside of the realm of sound science, and I basically say no.
Hmm.
So, um,
Gotcha.
but again, I want to bring diversity to the conversation. There are even people I've interviewed that I don't agree with necessarily, but I wanted to learn, A, what their science said or what their theory is. And I don't know who all is in my audience, so maybe they would find it resonant, you know?
Hmm. Interesting. Okay. And you don't have to answer this if it's going to put you in a bad spot, but I'm curious. What can you give us an example of like what is not sound science?
Sure. I think hydrogen water
Hmm.
is a little bit, uh, sure, there's science that they can bring to the conversation and say, look at all these studies. Um, and it's very, when it's nutrition or supplements, that kind of thing, it's incredibly difficult to get the kind of science that science is double blind and paleo or whatever you want to say. But we don't have long-term studies because you can't put people in a box for 3 years and watch everything they eat and breathe and drink and move and don't move. It's just so we have these short window studies, like hydrogen water may have studies on humans that it did something for them, but I can't find enough of the kind of research that I would like to stand behind.
I see.
And I also don't, there are some direct marketing companies that have some, I would say, outlandish claims. And I, as a rule, also don't do multi-level marketing companies just because that's more of a business invitation than it is strictly a conversation about something that's helpful for aging.
Gotcha. Gotcha. What got you into this space in the first place? The health, the wellness, everything else. Where does that come from?
I don't know. Well, like I said, I wanted to be a doctor. When I was a chef, I was always studying, researching anything it didn't matter. My mom got sick. She had pancreatic cancer. I was a teenager. I was like 18 or 19. And because of this drive to help, I thought that I could possibly bring supplements to I was reading every book I could get my hand on. Well, clearly that was not going to be an option. It still isn't today. Not just supplements or, that kind of thing. But it sort of started me on this path of what would have helped? Because there are a lot of people that say you can cure cancer naturally and this and that. I don't know about pancreatic cancer, but I got the bug that there are some natural things that might be missing from most people's life that could possibly help. And then it just became one thing or another. I went to work for a heart surgeon when I was a chef. I moved to California, and this was in the late 90s. His MO was, I want to operate on less people, not because I want to work less, but because I want less people to have heart disease. And so we opened this heart healthy quick food restaurant called Daly's. His name was Daly's, Daly's Fit and Fresh. And in order for him to get the message across to the executive team, he invited us each individually to stand in the OR and watch heart surgery so he could show us the condition of a damaged heart. So I did that. As you can imagine, a person wanting to be a doctor, I was on cloud nine. I stood literally at the head of the patient. Anesthesiologist was right next to me. Before we started, he said, do me a favor. If you're going to faint, faint backwards, not onto the patient. So it was just so eye-opening to see what the heart would naturally. First of all, it needed new art. They do the cabbage, 5 arteries, whatever they are. And the heart, when it first came out, was just this limp thing. And then when they cleared away some of the extraneous fat and put the new blood vessels in, It was pumping like crazy. But meanwhile, this woman had been sawn in half, like from belly button to throat almost, above the sternum. And then they had to harvest a vein from her leg. So that's another bit of surgery. And his point was a lot of people, his theory was 60% of the people that I operate on don't need to get to this point. Now it's 80%. So in 35 years or so, we've really we understand now how much more lifestyle makes a difference too. And so that was the next layer. And then when I got into coaching, I started writing online way before, like 20 years ago. And I was speaking and I used to do multi-speaker events, kind of like a podcast, but do you remember when you'd have like 20 speakers, one a day, and it was live? You'd have to show up if you wanted to hear it a long time ago.
Oh yeah.
And I just kept loving it and loving it. And I had a big list. And my first business online was called Midlife with a Vengeance because I was in midlife. I was going through perimenopause. I started writing about it. And here we are, 20 years later, still doing it.
That's a great story. I love that. So you started off, getting into that space, doing a lot of writing, and you wrote a book too.
I did.
Your genes do not determine the size of your genes. And of course, the two genes are spelled different, but
Yep.
I'll let you talk about that. So, what did you cover in that book? What was that book about?
I went down a rabbit hole of something called epigenetics.
Ah,
There's a guy named Bruce Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton. He's a cellular biologist. He was. He doesn't do that anymore. And I was in the personal development space. I was absorbing everything I could. And he was there talking about how he would put cells in petri dishes and then he would change either the early dish to see what it would do to them or the environment around the petri dish, plants, no plants, loud music, good music, bad music. And he noticed that anytime there was something stressful, either in their medium or in the room, they would clump together and they would stop respiration and they would do this, that, and the other thing. So epigenetics is the science of what goes on around a cell that influences the health and well-being of that cell. So the book, I started getting involved, interested in genetics and how this epigenetic possibility would translate into the world. And it was, again, in the personal development space, everybody knows Bruce Lipton. But when I wrote my book, it was not a personal development book. It was about the myths around aging for women.
hmm,
So that's where I started. And that's why it's your genes, genes, don't determine the size of your genes because so much, and again, I said earlier, it's 80% of what we do is more powerful than the 20% of genetics we've been given. Now, for certain diseases, Tay-Sachs, certain they are genetically determined you're going to have that disease. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the average human who has, we have a lot of influence, even what we think. And I have a thing that's everything is food. Everything we eat, everything we think, everything we take in, social media, all of the environmental cues and clues that we're getting, they all create a hormonal response in the body. And it's either good or it's not so good. So, anyway, that's all wrapped up in the book. But the book really was about busting the myths like calories in equal calories out. That's a really big myth. Fat is bad for you. Bad. Not bad for you. But people like to make it bad. So I think there were 10 chapters, and each one of them took on one of those situations.
wow. All right. That sounds really interesting. I've heard of epigenetics. I didn't, exactly know how it applied here, but
Yeah.
that's very interesting. All right. So, so you write the book on epigenetics, and now at that point, when you're writing that, are you at that point a practicing life coach, loss coach, that type of thing?
Yep. Yep. And I
Yeah,
was doing a lot of public speaking, and which is a great way to get clients and sell books, right? You write the
sure.
book so that you can get the speaking gig, and then some people buy the book, and then it goes from there.
Right.
So one of the speak had us write a book. And so I sort of had great incentive, you know, to get the book done because it was part of the requirement to take the course.
Got it. All right. All right. Good deal. Now, at what point, well, let me ask you this. How long have you been doing the podcast and how many episodes do you have?
I've been doing the podcast, although again, I switched the name so that Apple shows it as, a new podcast, but I've been doing it for 3 years and I have 135 episodes, 38, something like that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Very cool. So at what point do you actually say, I'm going to go all in and make this podcast up and this is what it's going to be about and this is what it's going to do? At what point do you get into that?
COVID.
Ah,
I I had stopped doing health coaching not long before COVID, maybe I want to say a couple of years before COVID, and I started this copywriting business for coaches because I was just done with the health space. Everybody was becoming a health coach, and it just seemed I was unhappy. Anyway, hung out my shingles, doing really well, and I'm speaking again to get clients. COVID comes, there's no speaking gigs. I'm thinking like, what am I going to do? But I also had a lot of time to read, and what I found was that none of the statistics surrounding women's health had improved in the couple of years that I wasn't really paying attention much to the health space. So 3 years go by, still the number one killer of men and women. There are still more increasingly frequent cases of diabetes. There, right? All of these things, and I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get back into that space and revitalize. I was going to do the multi-speaker events, but now it was podcasting. So I just decided to do it, and that was it. I did it. I'm one of
that's
those people. It's like I get an idea, I do a little research. If it sounds like it might be fun or it's going to work, I try it. If it doesn't work, you know what? It's all good.
well, so that's great. So you're one of these people who says why not instead of why.
Yeah.
Just jump out.
Yep.
That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. The podcast itself, then I mean, it sounds, of course, like it's educational, and whatnot, but it also sounds like it's part of your marketing plan. Is that a little
Yeah,
accurate in terms of how you
absolutely.
use it?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. The odd thing is, though, as I started to do these podcast interviews for health on a health related topic, I got copywriting clients because people would I would interview them and I would go to their website. I always before I interview, like I said, I check them out. I usually opt in for their free offer if they have one just to see. And sometimes the website wouldn't work. So I just tell people, I'm like, oh, and then there were a couple of people that I really resonated with their business. And so I would just write them a letter and say, hey, I think this could help. And soft sell, no, no big, no cold call.
Sure.
Just here's what I think I could do if you're interested. And I've had quite a few clients that way. And the one I mentioned quickly that I now write for a genetics company, I got her because I interviewed her. So now I'm her chief copywriter and marketer.
Nice. Not enough people use their podcast that way, for lead generation and that
It's
type of thing.
interesting
So,
that you wouldn't, though. I mean, I guess if people just want to put out the information and maybe they have sponsors or because, it costs money to do the podcast, Rory. So
right,
I'm thinking I got to bring that money back somehow.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. Have you had a chance to monetize the podcast itself with, say, sponsors or anything like that, or is it all the coaching addendum?
It's pretty much the coaching. And this iteration, I would like to either start doing sponsorship is tricky for me because if I could mention the sponsor and have their logos and things on the page, that would be one thing. But what I find disruptive, and it is not the same for everybody, is when an ad runs, the podcast is going, somebody's about to, it's like your favorite Netflix thing is over and you got to wait a year for the next episode. Now somebody's listening to this thing going, wait, what happened over here? And now a minute goes by and then you go back to them. I find that disruptive, so I don't want to do that kind of monetization. But again, some people do it really well. They read their own ads. I've
Mhm.
I've heard a couple that are fine. So I'm still figuring that out.
Interesting. Okay, good deal. Now, how do you go about promoting your podcast? And what is it that you have found that works great? And what is it you found is really not working?
Leaving it up to social media is really not working. I mean,
There
I
you
do
go.
reels, I do posts, but it does not move the needle as much as just talking to people. I was at a cocktail party. A photographer that did my headshots had a party for all the people that she had done headshots of for a while. And there were a lot of women my age. And of course, people say, what do you do? Or the photographer had introduced me. She has a podcast. You might want to talk to her. And people write it down. And then, they listen. And sometimes I hear from them. Sometimes I don't. Um, or some people, and you may find this, when I interview somebody, before we get on, I check to make sure they have some kind of social media following. Because if they have a following and we both promote, it tends to move the needle. If they have a newsletter and they put the podcast in a newsletter, that's by far and away the best because
Nice.
the trusted voice of the people getting the newsletter is saying this was a great episode for whatever, you know. So that I always get signups to my newsletter and stuff when I do that.
Nice. I love that you're demonstrating, like above all else right now, do your homework before you just jump on a podcast or have someone jump on yours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look into it, do some research. So I love that because so many people don't.
You
You know,
get burned if you just say yes to people and you're on the other, you know, like you, I do video. Um, I do remember one person, I thought I had done my homework, and then we like half an hour before, I'm looking at the person's name and I went to their website and I'm like, oh, I didn't do a deep enough dive. And they had, it was, let's just say, a different political view in the health space than I would have been comfortable talking about. And I didn't run that episode. I did the interview, but it got a little bit, it went places I wouldn't have gone. So I just wrote to them afterwards. I said, I'm really sorry. I should have done a better research. I just owned it, right? What am I going to say? I'm not promoting this because I don't like you. I just said, look, I
right,
apologize. I just,
right.
yeah.
I think everybody has one of those where you get into it and you're like, wow, this isn't what I thought, no matter how much research you
Yeah,
you
that's
do.
true too. You can get those. Yeah.
Right. Now, has that only happened to you once?
That kind of thing has only happened to me once. I have had more than one episode where the person forgets to take a breath. They're like talking, just like this stream of consciousness, or they think that they're telling a cohesive story, which they may be, but that's not what an interview is about, really, you know? And, the best guests get it. We all know what it's like to have a That's all it is a conversation. I don't want to be TEDx'd, you know?
I love that. I don't want to be TEDx'd.
I've recently had one that was a TEDx talk, basically.
Wow. And you
Hmm.
basically say, hey, welcome to the show. And then you say, all right, and that's all the time we have. It's pretty much over.
Well, I don't know about you. I don't think you and I do the same thing. There's the intro that's canned with music. But before that, I do, a 30, 40 second, hey, everybody, this week it's
Yeah,
so and so, right?
right.
And for that one, I just said, this is less an interview than it is a presentation. So let me direct you over to the YouTube channel because there's visuals and there was slides and demonstrations and all kinds of stuff. And it was very entertaining. It just wasn't a typical interview. So I wanted people to know that.
That's nice. You put a little public service announcement at the
There
beginning
you
of the
go.
audio
And then it
version.
gets people to my YouTube channel, all good.
I mean, that's win-win-win.
Yeah, it is.
So it's always that's hilarious that you brought that up. The folks who are getting TEDx'd. I'm going to steal that. I hope that's okay.
Please do. Please share.
I
Have
love
you
that
had
one.
that experience, Rory?
Oh my goodness. And what really cracks me up is when it's another podcast host who's doing
Oh,
that because
yes.
you know
Yeah.
that they can't stand it if people do that to them.
Mm.
But then they do it to me and I'm like,
There's a
really?
disconnect here. Yeah. Like they're
So
so used to being on the other side and not telling their story, they just gotta say stuff. They have
yeah.
to talk.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's nerves that takes over at that point or what
Yeah,
it
I don't
is, but
know.
it's just hilarious. I love that you brought
Funny.
that up. Okay. So the grassroots movement is the thing that has worked for you in promotion in terms of just telling people about it and giving them the
Hmm.
name and that type of thing. That's excellent to hear. I mean, I think
Yeah.
everybody just figures that you live and die on social media one way or another.
Well, die generally. Yeah. I mean, the part of the thing is the algorithms change so quickly. Even on something as stodgy as LinkedIn, I would listen to a guy who's an expert, and so many things have changed on LinkedIn recently. And so if you don't know what it is that has changed, you're doing the old stuff, you start to not necessarily lose followers, but you don't show up in their feed as
Yeah.
often. And the good thing about, I think one thing when it comes to speaking to people, I don't know about you, but sometimes we get shy about promoting our own stuff. And I might meet somebody, so let's just say I'm sitting on the train going into Manhattan and I start a conversation. Just because it's a woman my age does not mean like they're going to want to listen to a podcast or my podcast. But if the conversation presents itself, if somebody says, what do you do? Well, then I'm going to say I'm a podcast host.
Yeah. No, I started off that way. Yeah, I mean, at the very, very beginning, back at the beginning of my podcasting journey, I was that way
Yeah,
for sure. And I didn't want to like, I felt like, I'm bragging or something. Now I'm just unabashed about it. I'm like, you know what? Hey, by the way, you ever hear this podcast? Here, hey, you give them a card, you move
good
on.
for you.
It's
I have
like,
to get cards made. I really wish that I had recently had cards. I was somewhere, I don't remember. I could tell the woman was Rebellious Wellness Life. We're having wine in a bar. I'm like, yeah, okay. She's never going to hear it because she doesn't remember. Neither one of us had a pen. So I should get a card.
those old business cards, they actually work still.
Do you think?
Oh, I know. I do it all the time. I've gotten clients off that,
Oh,
which is
good.
just hilarious, because you wouldn't think. Everybody makes fun of them now.
I know.
But and
Well,
even
you're
when I hand
supposed
it
to
to
have a
them,
QR code or electronic card.
I'm not tapping my phone with 500 people I don't know.
Yeah, right.
I'm
Go to
just
an
not.
event, your phone's blown up after that if you have a
That's right.
QR code.
I love that. Um, and I'm still sitting here. I wrote down TEDx. I'm stealing that 100%.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. All right. So let's see. I just completely lost my train of thought because I was looking right at it. You
Okay.
mentioned a couple of things in terms of health, and somewhere in the Podcatch or Podmatch profile, you talked about like cholesterol and I think statins
Mm.
with women and that type of thing. Um, what is your stance on that? Just because that sounded interesting, and then I brought it up briefly with my wife, and she was like, "Oh yeah, that's a really hot topic." And then she was like out the door, and I'm going, "Okay, well now I'm not prepared for this at all, so I'm just going to have to throw myself down and ask you, what is that about?"
Okay, so first of all, cholesterol is natural in our bodies. And when babies are born, mother's milk has loaded with cholesterol and fat and stuff. So it seems like could have been at one point in time a valuable nutrient, right? And now we've gotten these VAP tests and how many big fluffy particles and little particles and HDL and LDL and your cholesterol is too high and everybody wants to give you a statin. The problem with statins is that they work. I don't want to get too sciencey, but they actually affect your mitochondria eventually. Let's just say the little energy cells in our body, they eventually damage those. And so some of the and besides not necessary. So 50% of the people that present with a heart attack have low cholesterol and 50% have high cholesterol. So where's the definitive one way or the other in that? There is no definitive. You can't say, well, the people with high cholesterol should have lower cholesterol because they had a heart attack. Well, what about the low cholesterol people? More people get dementia and neuropathy, all kinds of nervous problems, like they're related in some studies, directly related to things like Parkinson's for people that have been on high dose statins for a really long time. And when you go on a statin, unless you do a radical change in your somehow to get your cholesterol to go down, you're going to be on that for the rest of your life. So say doctors. And I've interviewed docs who are cardiologists, cardiac surgeons, who would never give a statin because they say that the cholesterol in your body is important. Food does not contribute to the cholesterol, the amount of cholesterol in your body. Zip, zilch, nada. Eat your eggs, eat your meat, whatever you like. And so these drugs are, and I could pull 5 doctors that I've interviewed in the transcript that have all said, when I worked for a medical practice, a big hospital practice, whatever, we had quotas of statins that we had to prescribe a certain amount of statins per month.
Oh my
Now
gosh.
that kind of tells you something about
Yeah.
whether they're actually that vital or not. And women are especially subjected to certain of the injuries that statins do to the body in different ways than men, because of course women are not just small men, although the medical industry has treated us as such for years. And so different things happen in our bodies. And as estrogen goes down, as a woman enters perimenopause and then menopause, cholesterol generally goes up, but only because the cholesterol, the estrogen and cholesterol have a relationship, and now the estrogen isn't there. So the cholesterol shows up a little bit more to take over some of the function in the body. And again, I don't want to get too sciencey, and I'll probably explain it poorly anyway, but I'm just not a big fan of statins. I know lots of people who have had side effects, and of course, then you get off your statin, but I just think they're not necessary. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
I appreciate you taking that ball and running with it. I didn't even really know how to ask the question. So you saved my
I
bacon on
hope
that
I
one.
did a little bit. good there.
I appreciate it very much. Do you work exclusively with women then? Do you work with men also? Do you specialize just in one or the other? How does that work
You
with your
know,
practice?
I've had a couple of men as clients, and I love the difference between my men clients and my women clients are generally speaking, and each of the men that I've coached were uh, in corporate, right? So that I'm just giving you that as a mentality. There's this mentality. They're in corporate, they're kind of go-getters and this and that. They want the down and dirty. They want the nuts and bolts. There's no mindset. There's no nothing. There's just like, here's where I am. Here's where I want to be. What are we going to do? And if there is an issue that I realize is their mindset, then of course we're going to go there and just say like, dude, just listen, right? You have to stop thinking everything's bad. Your stress level's out of the roof because you're stressed because you're thinking all the right. Most women, and I always ask, what kind of coach do you want? Do you want a tough nut cookie kind of coach? Or do you want me to go slow and be a little bit softer, gentler, and let's examine everything. So I think I can get either, I can help either type of person. Um, but I just know more about women's physiology and women's mindset and their emotions and their problems. So it's probably a safer bet for me to stick to my female category.
Interesting. Okay. And this is kind of putting you on the spot a little bit, but
Okay.
in
I'm
terms of men and women, can you narrow it down to be able to say, hey, the biggest health risk, or one of the things that's sort of like the hot points, um, something that people really need to pay attention to when it comes to men and women? And are they different or are they the same?
They're the same and different. So I would say that, and this is also your wife said that's a hot button. Hormones are a huge hot button right now out there.
Hmm.
Bioidentical hormone replacement. Whereas it was a big thing back in the 80s. In the 90s, there was a study, and they said all these bad things would happen if you took hormones. We had to stop the study, but they were using, I just wrote an article this week on my blog about this. They used horse urine to create an estrogen for women, and so that, right off the bat, you're like, hmm. Anyway, there are a lot of problems with the study. So people got put off. Well, now it's like, okay, if estrogen goes down and it's cardioprotective, bone protective, brain protective, emotionally, depression, it helps with everything. What are we afraid of if we have bioidentical versions or plant-based versions? They may not be as strong, but they do work. And, for some women don't want to go compounded drugs. So how do men fit into that? Well, testosterone, because as men age, they go through what's called andropause, and their estrogen levels go up, which is one of the contributing factors to those lovely love handles. And their testosterone goes down. Well, testosterone is also protective. So in women, we want to restore the estrogen balance. In men, we want to put testosterone up on the pedestal where it should be above the estrogen. And women can also need testosterone. It's really great for muscles, energy, strength in general. So I would say that okay, so I spoke to my doctor. I have a hypothyroidism. So my thyroid doc is also my hormone doc. And I said to him at the end of our conversation the other day, I was asking him about some of these designer drugs that are being used off label for anti-aging, like metformin and a couple of other ones. And he said, you have a podcast, right? I said, yeah. He said, here's the best thing you can do for your listeners. Tell them to stop chasing designer drugs and supplements and get on hormones. It's the best thing they can do for their health. He's a really
Wow,
good
really?
doctor.
So that's like TRT and
Yep.
stuff like
And
that?
he treats men and women. Sorry.
That's like TRT and stuff like
I,
that for men. That's the one I'm hearing the most.
oh, I don't know the initials, but yeah, if it's a testosterone,
Yeah, it's a
and there are
testosterone
others that use
replacement. Yeah.
DHEA, and yeah, yeah,
Interesting. Hmm.
yeah,
All right. I'm hearing that a lot amongst in the men's groups that I'm a part of. I mean, it seems like everybody, as soon as they hit 45, they're immediately going, all right, I got to get on TRT, or I got to get, testosterone replacement therapy, something. And it just made me
yeah.
wonder, I'm like, everybody's doing this, is it actually healthy? Is it really good for you? And I figured, well, we're
Right.
talking
That
about
when
this. Maybe I
everybody's
should
doing
ask
it,
you.
it's like, yeah, and so of course everybody is not a candidate for all of these things. It would be nice if everybody could have the influence of these hormones back in their lives as we age, but not everybody, especially if you've had cancer. Certain types of cancer
Mm.
preclude you from, so I don't want people to hear listening to this say like, oh, great, I'm just going to go out and order me some
For sure.
hormones online.
Right. Nobody's endorsing anything here. We're just
No,
having a
absolutely not.
conversation. You got
No,
it. You got it.
no.
I appreciate you sharing your insights on that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, let me ask you my corny question in the interest of time. Let me get this in there for you.
Okay.
In terms of doing your podcast,
Mhm.
what is it about doing your podcast that you love the most? And what is it about doing your podcast that you just absolutely throw it out the window, dislike the most? You're already laughing. That's a good sign.
Ah. What I love doing the most is interviewing the people, actually researching the people, because of course I don't wait for people to pitch me. I would be without people, right? I
Sure.
go out and find people, and here's what's not to do for your listeners who might be new and or struggling to find people. In the past, especially when I was in a lot of personal development, doing sales and stuff, I would always say, don't not go after a whale, a person with a big profile, just because you think they're going to say no. All they can say is yes or no. Well, then I kind of got shy and I go, but recently I was on Instagram the other day. There's a guy that I follow. He's a trainer. He is hilariously funny and he's so right on in a rebellious way about all these influencers telling you to eat raw meat and all this crap. And anyway, he's got hundreds of thousands of followers. And I said, you know what? I'm gonna go right to him. And he said, yes, I'd love to be on your pod. I was like, ha ha. Okay, so that's what I love. What I don't love at all is the editing. And I will not edit. I mean, I know yours is free form. I think it's great. But what happens to me, what happens is if somebody says something slightly off skew and it's about health or they went on like, 4 sentences longer than they had to and it got complicated, I will edit that out and try to make it a little bit easier. So I feel like I still have to do the editing myself, but I use a platform called Descript, which edits the
Yep.
video at the same time as the transcript. So it's made it much easier over the years, but that's probably my least favorite thing.
Yeah, if we did this Family Feud style top five answers on the board, editing is almost always the number one answer
Yeah,
of of what people can't stand. So
yeah.
I don't blame you at all. Yeah, no, I can absolutely see why in your line of work, especially, why editing may be necessary because you
Hmm.
do have to worry about the nuances of what gets said and how it's interpreted and everything else
Exactly.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's awesome that you're aware of that too on your podcast. I mean, so many
I don't want to
people, I think,
mislead anybody. People
yeah,
hear things and they run off on a tangent, and that's when bad things happen.
right, right. All right. I love this. As we kind of,
Mhm.
pull things together and get towards the end here a little bit, you've given a lot of advice, on a lot of different topics. Let me kind of ask you, in terms of podcasters who are not at that 130 plus episode, mark yet, for those folks who are not quite where you are, what's your best piece of advice or, a couple pieces of advice for them to, help them get to that point?
You, if you haven't launched and you've been sitting on a couple episodes, just put them out. Really, just honestly, the hardest thing to do is to put yourself out there. And in the beginning, when you check your stats and you had one listener this week and one listener the next, just shut that down. Stop looking at that. And you have to be willing to, like anything. I mean, running a business, being a coach, being a parent, you have to be willing to just go through those days when you don't feel like it. I don't feel like doing my podcast. I don't want to find people. I don't want to edit. Okay, fine. Well, then you won't have a podcast. So I would say you have to kind of be a loving parent on certain days and just say, no, you have to sit down and find, you don't have anybody 3 weeks from now. What are you going to do? Right. And we can always do our own episodes. I mean, I do occasionally do my own episode. Um, it's how much, if you have, I hate to sound like, what's his name? Simon Sinek. If you have a why, for doing your podcast, that will keep you going through the days where it really feels like just slogging uphill, I think. What do you think, Rory?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that anybody who does a podcast has to be in touch with their why as to why they're doing it. And
Hmm.
the why cannot be because I want to make money
Right.
or you're not going to be here long.
Unless you're Joe Rogan.
Well, true. Yeah, Joe came into this business with a few more connections and things than most of us
Possibly.
have. So just a
Possibly.
little
Yeah.
smidge. Yeah, maybe a little more. I love that. Oh, Greg, thank you so much for all of this. I've had a blast. I hope that you've had it, a little bit of fun
Absolutely. This was great.
doing this, and I love that you're so open and willing to talk about all this stuff. From healthcare and life coaching and weight loss to podcasting. So, the host of Rebellious Wellness Lifestyle. Now, if folks want to get in touch with you, what is the best way to do that? Website,
That is,
socials? What works for you?
yeah, go to the website, rebelliouswellnesslifestyle.com, and I have to plug that Power of Five. It really
Oh,
is a great, simple, free, gives it to you. It's like, here's the point, here's how to apply it in your daily life. And a day two, here's the, right? It's just very, I don't like long-winded nonsense. I
oh
want,
no, not at
like
all.
I said earlier, I just want the goods, right? At this age, just give it to me.
And I
So,
apologize. I totally missed that. Tell everybody about that course that you have and
no,
what
no,
it's
I
about.
did. We talked about it earlier, the Power of Five, and it's right there on the website when you go there. It's right under the header.
Hmm.
And my newsletter is called the Reality Check. Reality, I can't speak. The Reality Check Radar. So when I write a long form newsletter, I do it every other week, which is kind of just stuff about what's going on in my life or the world. But it's about a reality check on what you're hearing in the news and what new science. There's a lot of old science that'll support all the old ways that doctors still saying. So that's what I cover in the newsletter.
Nice, nice. All right. And now, if are all those links in Podmatch? If they are, I'm going to grab them all out. If they're not, if you can put them in our comments between the two of us, I'll make sure that I get them into the show notes for everybody.
Yeah, sure, I will.
Okay, beautiful. All right, folks, you
Yes, I
heard it
will
right
do that.
there from Greg. All that stuff's going to be in the show notes for you. All right. So if we're missing anything, let me know. I'll find out. We'll get them put in there. These are all evergreen, so it should work out great. All right, beautiful. Greg, thank you again for all this. I appreciate you uh,
Thank you, Rory.
and what you're doing. So it's been really wonderful getting to know you, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you. You're a great interviewer.
Well, I appreciate that. Folks, this has been another awesome episode of The Podcaster Nation. And why was it so awesome? Because this is the place that is for podcasters. It's about podcasters and it's done by podcasters. Folks, you heard it again here today. This is the place where the rising tide truly raises all ships. So keep sailing.